The Galactic Alliance training facility, known throughout the universe as the Crucible of Greatness, stood as a symbol of excellence, a place where only the most exceptional individuals became warriors, diplomats, and scientists, ready to uphold the fragile peace of the galaxy. Located on the desolate moon of V7, its colossal structure rose like an imposing fortress, its dark metal surface glimmering under the twin sun's harsh rays. Recruits came from every corner of the galaxy. The imposing Zons, encased in their reinforced exoskeletons, the agile serpentine Clarins, able to squeeze through the tightest of spaces, and the radiant Aeorans, whose glowing skin conveyed complex emotions and messages in silence. It was a prestigious institution, yet one that demanded absolute perfection. There was no room for weakness, and any flaw was ruthlessly crushed under the weight of unyielding expectations. Among these elite cadets stood Rachel Young, the first human ever to be accepted into the Galactic Alliance training program. Her admission had stirred considerable debate among the Alliance Council. While humans were famed for their adaptability and their chaotic, perilous homeworld, many believed they were ill-suited for the program compared to other galactic species. Despite Earth's reputation as a death world, its inhabitants lacked the physical or mental enhancements that other species possessed. Commander Kral, a formidable Xenian whose battle-scarred exoskeleton marked his countless victories, was especially vocal in his disdain for Rachel's inclusion. Having trained many cadets, he saw no reason for a human to be part of the academy. To him, it was a political maneuver, a gesture to placate Earth following its recent acceptance into the Alliance. Kral had no intention of letting Rachel slide by. If she was to stay, she would earn it or be crushed in the process. Rachel's first day at the academy was met with a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and mockery. Physically average in stature, she appeared unimpressive compared to her peers. Her muscles, while firm, seemed laughably weak beside the bulging limbs of the Xenians or the sleek, coiled strength of the Clarins. Even her uniform, tailored to fit her human frame, seemed out of place amidst the streamlined, metallic outfits of the other cadets. The first challenge assigned to the new recruits was deceptively simple, a standard obstacle course designed to test coordination and stamina. For Rachel, it was far from simple. The course featured segments requiring superhuman agility, such as scaling vertical walls coated with a sticky substance that clung to her skin. Other sections demanded immense strength, including a weightlifting station where her alien counterparts easily lifted boulders several times her size. Yet the most grueling task was the endurance trial, a blistering sprint through a simulated desert where temperatures exceeded the limits of even Earth's most advanced suits. Start! Commander Kral's voice rang out across the training ground, his mandibles clicking as he watched eagerly. Rachel sprang into action, her Earth military training kicking in. She powered through the initial challenges with unexpected ease, drawing curious glances from her fellow cadets. But as the course wore on, the difficulty became increasingly clear. The wall climb, in particular, was her greatest struggle. Rachel slipped time and again, her hands torn and bleeding. By the time she reached the summit, a Clarin cadet had already reached the top, effortlessly gliding up the slick surface as if it were second nature. Intriguing, the Euron instructor observed, her bioluminescent skin dimly flickering as she spoke to Kral. She doesn't possess the innate abilities of the others, yet she continues to press on. Persistence without progress is pointless, Kral replied curtly, his tone dismissive. However, his multifaceted eyes lingered on Rachel for longer than he had intended, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his gaze. By the time Rachel reached the endurance trial, her body was on the brink of collapse. Every muscle screamed in protest, and her lungs burned as she struggled to adjust to RX-7's thin atmosphere. The desert simulation was even more brutal than she had imagined. The artificial sun beat down relentlessly, and the shifting sands beneath her feet made each step feel like a battle. The alien cadets, built for such extreme conditions, moved past her with ease. Some of them jeered as they passed, their voices cutting through the howling winds. Careful, human, a Xenian cadet sneered. You might just fry. Rachel gritted her teeth, unwilling to let their words provoke her. Her focus was singular. She had to finish, no matter the cost. With every step, she repeated the mantra she had clung to during Earth's grueling military training. One more step, just one more, as the heat washed over her. Her thoughts drifted back to her time on Earth. She remembered the brutal drills, the endless hours of exertion, the times when her body had screamed for rest, yet she had never given in. Not then, and certainly not now. The final stretch of the desert was the most punishing, a steep incline of loose sand that led to the finish line. Rachel's legs felt as though they were made of stone, her vision narrowing with every step as the heat threatened to overwhelm her. She stumbled twice, each fall a brutal reminder of her limitations, but each time, she forced herself back to her feet. feet. Some of her fellow cadets watched from the sidelines, some out of respect, others only to see if she would collapse before reaching the end. When Rachel finally crossed the finish line, her body gave out and she dropped to her knees, trembling from exhaustion. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a slow, deliberate clap echoed across the field. It was Kral. His expression remained stoic, but there was something in his eyes. Maybe respect, maybe intrigue. Cadet Young, he called, his voice firm and clear. You are adequate. For now. Rachel, her face streaked with sweat and sand, glanced up at him. She didn't reply, but her gaze met Kral's with unyielding resolve. She had survived the first day, and she would survive whatever came next. The first week at the Galactic Alliance training facility proved to be a relentless test for Rachel. Each day began before the twin suns of V7 rose, with a shrill alarm signaling the start of another grueling cycle. Unlike her alien peers, who adapted to the demanding schedule with relative ease thanks to their unique biology, Rachel found herself constantly teetering on the edge of exhaustion. Her quarters, a small, metallic cubicle barely large enough for a bed and a storage compartment, offered no comfort. The air was dry and cold, the hum of the station's machinery incessant, making sleep a rare and fleeting escape. Her body ached from the previous day's tests. Her hands were raw from gripping the abrasive training gear, and bruises from countless falls marred her skin, each one a reminder of how close she had come to failure. The day's training began in the simulation chambers, vast rooms capable of replicating any environment in the galaxy, from the blizzards of Thaler to the crushing gravity of Jan's twin suns. Each environment was as unforgiving as the last, pushing Rachel further, testing her limits with every challenge. Today's simulation placed Rachel in the heart of a perilous jungle, brimming with hidden threats. The objective was clear: navigate the treacherous terrain, retrieve a beacon, and return without setting off any motion-detecting traps or alerting the simulated predators lurking in the shadows. Rachel entered the simulation chamber with her squad, a diverse group of Clarans, Aeorans, and Xenians. Commander Kral stood at the control console, his piercing eyes scanning the recruits as he briefed them with a sneer. Your mission is straightforward, he said, his mandibles clicking in disdain. Retrieve the beacon, avoid detection. Fail, and there will be consequences. Begin. The jungle came alive with noise, the hum of unseen creatures, the rustling of foliage stirred by the artificial wind. The thick humidity pressed down on Rachel, seeping through her uniform and making each movement more taxing. Within moments, her squad had seamlessly adapted to their environment. The Clarans slithered through the dense undergrowth, their scales gliding silently over the terrain. The Aeorans used their bioluminescence to silently communicate, their glowing bodies flashing in coordinated patterns. Even the Xenians, with their bulky exoskeletons, moved with surprising stealth, their steps muffled by their thick armor. Rachel, however, struggled. Every step was an obstacle, her boots sinking into the damp soil, making her progress slow and noisy. The weight of her equipment, standardized for alien physiques, seemed almost unbearable on her human frame. She crouched low, moving cautiously, but the eyes of her squad were acutely aware of her every misstep. She's a liability, one of the Clarans whispered to another, their voice just loud enough for Rachel to hear. We'll be caught because of her. Rachel clenched her teeth but remained silent, focusing solely on the mission. She kept her gaze fixed on the faint, glowing beacon in the distance. As they neared the beacon, the simulation's predators were triggered. The Varno, a species infamous across the galaxy for its hunting prowess, was now stalking the squad. 8 feet tall, with razor-sharp claws and hypersensitive senses, these creatures reacted to movement, sound, and scent. The first Varno appeared, its glowing red eyes scanning the surroundings. The squad froze, their training kicking in as they relied on instinct to avoid detection. But Rachel was not as well suited. Her heart hammered in her chest, her breath quickening despite her best efforts to remain composed. The Xenian squad leader signaled for the group to split, using his hand-like appendages to communicate. Rachel hesitated, unsure of the gesture, but quickly realized she was being left behind. Alone, she crouched behind a cluster of large ferns, watching as the predator drew nearer. The Varno's nostrils flared as it caught an unfamiliar scent. Rachel knew she had to act. Drawing on her Earth military training, she grabbed a smoke pellet from her utility belt and hurled it a few meters away. The pellet erupted with a sharp hiss, and the predator, distracted, turned toward the noise. Seizing the moment, Rachel bolted toward the beacon. Her movements lacked the fluidity of the aliens, but they were deliberate and efficient. She reached the beacon just as another predator emerged from the shadows, its hulking frame charging toward her. With a guttural roar, the Varno lunged, its claws slashing through the air mere inches from Rachel's face. In a split second, she ducked and rolled, narrowly evading the strike. Her heart raced, but she pressed on, determined to complete the mission. Adrenaline coursed through Rachel's veins as she scanned her environment, searching for anything she could use to her advantage. Her eyes fell on a fallen branch nearby, its jagged end resembling a crude spear. Without hesitation, she grabbed it and thrust it toward the predator. As the creature charged once again, the makeshift weapon drove into its side with a sickening thud, causing the Varno to screech in pain. It wasn't a fatal blow, but it bought her a crucial few moments. Rachel scrambled to her feet, clutching the beacon tightly in one hand as she started her retreat. Her squad, observing from a safe distance, exchanged murmurs of surprise. The Clarens spoke in hushed tones, impressed. "She's tougher than she looks," one of them admitted. The Xenian cadet motioned for the group to regroup and assist, but Rachel didn't wait for help. She pushed forward, her mind laser-focused on the mission, using the jungle's thick foliage to her advantage and staying one step ahead of the predators. When she finally reached the extraction point, she was battered, bruised, and gasping for breath, but she had completed the mission. As the simulation ended, the recruits gathered in the observation chamber. The alien cadets had barely broken a sweat, their natural advantages making the mission seem almost effortless. Rachel, on the other hand, was a mess, her uniform torn, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, and her hands trembling from exhaustion. Commander Kral approached her, his mandibles clicking as he assessed her performance. "You retrieved the beacon," he said, his voice neutral, "but you failed to coordinate with your team." Rachel met his gaze, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. "I adapted to the situation. The squad left me behind." Kral's eyes narrowed. Excuses don't matter, only results do. Yet, despite his harsh words, there was something in his expression, something almost imperceptible, that hinted at something more. He had expected Rachel to crumble under the pressure, to fail. Instead, she had survived, showing resourcefulness and ingenuity that even his best cadets rarely displayed. "Dismissed," he said, his tone final as he turned away. As Rachel made her way back to her quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had earned a small, begrudging respect from the commander. That night, as she tended to her wounds in the quiet of her cramped cubicle, she overheard snippets of conversation from the other recruits. Some were impressed by her performance, others dismissed it as luck. The Clarens, in particular, seemed divided. "She's reckless," one murmured. "She'll get us all killed." "She's resourceful," another countered. "And resourcefulness is what wins battles." Rachel leaned against the cold metal wall, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She had made it through another day. The Academy was pushing her to her breaking point, but she was pushing back. And for the first time since her arrival on V7, she felt a glimmer of hope. The Galactic Alliance training facility was silent in the hours before dawn, the kind of silence that felt heavy with anticipation. Rachel sat cross-legged on the floor of her small quarters, her breathing steady as she meditated. It was a technique she had learned during her time in Earth's military, a way to calm her nerves before high-stress missions. The pressure of the Academy weighed on her, but as she sat there in the stillness, she felt a flicker of strength. She was ready for whatever came next. Rachel's body screamed in protest from the constant strain of the rigorous training, but she pushed through the pain. Today was different. Today marked the beginning of the final test, a rescue mission simulation, one that was rumored to be so challenging that even the most experienced cadets would be pushed to their limits. Commander Kral stood before them in the central briefing hall, his towering form casting a long shadow over the gathered recruits. His voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding, as he outlined the mission. "You will navigate a collapsing cave system to rescue a downed pilot and retrieve critical data from their vessel," he announced, his mandibles clicking ominously. "The terrain will be unstable, the air toxic in places, and the predators, well, let's hope they don't find you." A ripple of nervous tension spread through the room. Even the typically stoic Xenian cadets shifted uncomfortably. Kral's simulations were notorious for their difficulty, and this one was whispered to be his most brutal yet. For Rachel, this was her moment to prove herself once and for all. The briefing concluded with a chilling reminder. "Failure here doesn't just mean disqualification," Kral said, his multifaceted eyes scanning the group. "It means you do not belong." As the cadets prepared their gear, Rachel noticed the subtle ways her peers distanced themselves from her. The Clarens, their serpentine bodies coiling in silent judgment, exchanged low murmurs. The Elons, usually distant but not unapproachable, refused to meet her gaze. Even the Xenian, who revered strength above all else, seemed to purposefully ignore her presence. Rachel tightened the straps on her equipment, forcing herself to disregard the growing isolation. She had long learned that survival didn't depend on gaining the approval of others. It depended on focus, resilience, and determination. The simulation began with a violent rumble, shaking the cavernous chamber around them. The The cave system was a maze of narrow, jagged tunnels and vast chambers, each more unstable than the last. The walls quivered with every step, as if the entire structure were moments away from collapsing. Rachel's squad moved with caution, their movements careful and deliberate. The Clarens, sleek and agile, slithered ahead, scouting the tightest passages. The Xenian, with their bulk and strength, took up the rear, offering protection against potential threats. Rachel found herself in the middle, her every movement under close scrutiny as she followed them deeper into the cave. The terrain grew increasingly unstable. The ground beneath their feet crumbled into jagged, yawning chasms, forcing the cadets to leap from one precarious ledge to another. Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she narrowly avoided falling into a deep pit, her hand grazing the edge of a rocky outcrop just in time to pull herself back up. She heard a Xenian cadet mutter something about her clumsiness, but she shut it out, focusing solely on the task ahead. She wasn't here to prove herself to them, only to herself. The first signs of trouble came when the air grew thin. The Aoran, whose bioluminescent skin pulsed faintly in the darkness, signaled a warning. Oxygen levels were plummeting. The cadets activated their breathing apparatuses, but Rachel's malfunctioned. Her visor blinked with a warning: oxygen supply critical. Panic surged in her chest as she gasped for air, but she fought it down. She wasn't about to falter now. Desperately, she rummaged through her gear, finding a makeshift sealant for the leak in her mask. It wasn't ideal, but it would hold for a while. With a deep breath, she tightened the seal, forcing herself to focus. The Clarens glanced back at her, their expressions unreadable, before continuing their journey. Rachel clenched her jaw. If she was going to survive this, she couldn't depend on anyone else. The squad reached a vast chamber, its walls lined with jagged crystals that caught the dim light from their headlamps, casting eerie reflections across the cavern. The air felt unnaturally still, too still. The Xenian at the front came to an abrupt halt, their exoskeletons tensing as they scanned the shadows. "They're here," one of them muttered, his voice low and urgent. From the darkness emerged the predators, Varno-like creatures, their sleek obsidian bodies gleaming in the faint light, their glowing red eyes locking onto the squad. Their movements were deliberate and predatory, their growls reverberating through the chamber, sending a chill down Rachel's spine. The cadets froze, their training kicking in as they swiftly assessed the threat. "Split up," a Xenian barked, and with that, the group scattered in all directions. Rachel found herself once again alone, her breath shallow and rapid as she ducked behind a cluster of sharp, glowing crystals. She could hear the predators prowling, their claws scraping against the stone floor as they drew closer. Her mind raced, weighing her options. Confronting them head-on was suicide, and hiding would only buy her a few seconds. Her eyes darted around, scanning for anything useful. Overhead, a cluster of loose crystals hung precariously, their sharp edges gleaming like daggers in the low light. An idea sparked. With a steady hand, she pulled a small detonator from her belt and carefully set the charge at the base of the cluster. The growls of the predators grew louder as they closed in on her position. Rachel's heartbeat thundered in her chest as she waited for the perfect moment. The creatures were just feet away when she triggered the detonator. The explosion was deafening. Crystals rained down in a storm of sharp shards, the debris striking the predators with precision. The creatures screeched in pain, disoriented by the sudden chaos. Rachel seized the opportunity, darting from her hiding place and slipping deeper into the cave system. Her heart pounded, but she didn't allow herself to stop. She pushed on, her mind focused only on survival. Not far ahead, she stumbled upon two cadets pinned beneath a collapsed section of the ceiling, a Claren and an Aoran. Their faces were twisted in pain and desperation as they fought to free themselves from the rubble. "Leave us," the Claren hissed, his voice strained. "You'll slow yourself down." Rachel ignored him, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the debris. Her focus shifted, calculating her next move. Using a nearby stalagmite, she fashioned a makeshift lever, and with all the strength she could muster, she pried the heavy rubble off the Aoran. Her bioluminescent skin flickered weakly, signaling her appreciation. But the Claren was heavier, and Rachel's muscles screamed in protest as she heaved the rubble off him, inch by inch. Just as she managed to free him, a Xenian arrived, their massive form moving swiftly through the rubble. Their eyes held a mix of surprise and respect as they surveyed the scene. "DS." Rachel clenched her fists, unsure of where this was going. Cadet Young not only completed the final simulation, but she did so by saving the lives of her squad and securing the mission's objective. Her resourcefulness and determination are unmatched. But there is one final test. Rachel turned toward Kral, confusion crossing her face. "Final test?" she asked cautiously. Kral's mandibles clicked, a sound that could almost be mistaken for amusement. "The Alliance values action above all else, Cadet Young. You've proven yourself in control controlled environments. Now you will prove yourself in the real world. As the lights dimmed, a holographic display flickered to life behind him. It showed a barren planet, its surface marred by swirling storms and jagged terrain. This is Tyrannis 4, Kral explained. A research station there has gone dark. Your mission is to investigate, retrieve the scientists, and secure the facility. The conditions are hostile, and the risk is high. Rachel's heart sank. This wasn't just another simulation. It was a live mission. The weight of failure now meant more than disqualification. It could mean death. You won't be alone, Kral continued. You will lead a squad consisting of the very cadets you saved yesterday. They will follow your command. The room erupted into whispers. The idea of a human leading a squad of elite alien recruits was unprecedented, and the cadets weren't shy about expressing their disbelief. Kral silenced them with a sharp click of his mandibles. Prepare for deployment. The journey to Tyrannis 4 was tense. Rachel sat in the cockpit of the dropship, reviewing the mission briefing one last time as her squad prepped their gear behind her. Raxar, the Xenian who had shown her a flicker of respect earlier, sat beside her in silence. You've earned this, Raxar said after a long pause, his voice blunt yet somehow comforting. Have I? Rachel replied, her voice laced with doubt. Or are they just testing how far a human can go before breaking? Raxar's mandibles twitched slightly, his expression unreadable. It doesn't matter what they're testing, Cadet Young, he said. What matters is that you lead and we follow. Does it matter? Raxar's voice broke through her thoughts, a rare tone of encouragement in his words. You're here. Prove them wrong. As the dropship descended into Tyrannis 4's turbulent atmosphere, the craft rattled under the strain of fierce winds and violent storms. Visibility was nearly non-existent, and the pilot struggled to maintain control. But despite the chaos, the dropship finally landed near the research station. The team disembarked, prepared to face the unknown terrain, but the journey ahead would be far from easy. The squad moved cautiously through the storm, their sensors barely functional in the thick, swirling clouds. Rachel led the way, her earth-honed instincts guiding her steps with precision. Every crunch of the rocks beneath her boots, every gust of wind against her face, fueled her determination. She couldn't afford to falter. Her team was relying on her. When they reached the station, the doors were sealed shut. The facility sat silent and abandoned, its exterior battered by the storm. Inside, the scene was chaos. Scattered equipment, overturned desks, and scorch marks that lined the walls. A sense of unease settled over the squad. There were no signs of life, but the data logs told a different story. The station's records revealed a chilling discovery. An experimental AI system had malfunctioned, causing the station's defense systems to turn against its inhabitants. The realization hit like a cold wave, but there was no time to process it further. Before they could act, the facility's automated defenses kicked into gear. Turrets emerged from the walls, firing with deadly precision. Take cover. Rachel's command cut through the tension, and her training took over. She directed the team into strategic positions, shouting orders with authority. The squad, once skeptical of her leadership, now obeyed without question. It was a brutal, intense fight. The squad worked seamlessly together, their earlier doubts about Rachel's capabilities fading as her decisive leadership led them through the chaos. As they advanced, they were battered but unbroken, each step bringing them closer to the AI core. Rachel's heart raced as they reached the core, its lights flickering ominously. Failure here would mean the destruction of the entire facility, and with it, her team's survival. Her hands moved over the interface, a combination of fear and determination pushing her forward. The corrupted protocols of the AI fought against her, but Rachel had learned to adapt. Drawing on the skills she had honed through years of adversity, she bypassed the AI's defenses and initiated the shutdown sequence. The lights of the core flickered once more and then dimmed completely. The facility fell silent, the automated defenses deactivated. The mission was a success. When the squad returned to the dropship, the atmosphere had changed. The cadets who had once dismissed Rachel as weak now looked at her with a new sense of respect. Raxar, his towering figure moving toward her, clapped her on the shoulder, a rare gesture of camaraderie from a Xenian. Rachel met his gaze, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes, though her words remained unsaid. She didn't need to speak. Back at the training facility, Kral awaited them in the hangar. His multifaceted eyes studied Rachel with a new depth of understanding. For the first time, he nodded in approval, his expression unreadable, but his respect undeniable. Cadet Young, Kral's voice resonated, softer than usual. You are no longer just just a recruit. You are an officer of the Galactic Alliance." The hall erupted into applause, the sound echoing off the walls as Rachel stood tall, a wave of pride and accomplishment washing over her. She had faced every challenge, endured every trial, and emerged stronger, unyielding, and victorious. For the first time since stepping onto V7, Rachel didn't feel like the outsider. She had found her place. She was no longer just Rachel Young, the human experiment. She was Rachel Young, a leader, a survivor, and a symbol of what humanity could achieve in the vastness of the galaxy.